The hangar was the size of a cathedral, and it was completely silent. $40 million on the line, a helicopter that wouldn't start, 20 engineers from the best schools in the country standing in a circle, arms crossed, out of answers. Then she walked toward him. The CEO, heels on concrete, the kind of woman who had never lost, looking at the one man nobody else had looked at. He was holding a mop. She stopped 5 feet away. The whole room stopped breathing. Her voice came out cold and clear as glass. Fix this helicopter. A pause. I was concentrating right now in front of everyone. He looked at her, then at the helicopter. Then he put the mop down and walked toward a machine that had defeated every expert in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because something was happening here that none of them had a name for yet. The alarm went off at 4:47 in the morning. Not 4:45. Not 5. 4:47. Because that was exactly how long Janitor needed to make breakfast, pass lunch, press his uniform, and still have 3 minutes to sit at the kitchen table and just breathe before the rest of the day swallowed him whole. Calculated at once, on napkin, in the parking lot of a Walgreens at midnight, because that's what your brain does when you've been running on 4 hours of sleep for 7 years straight. 3 minutes. That's what he allowed himself. Not for coffee, not for the news, just for the particular quality of silence that existed in that apartment before Imani woke up. Before the world remembered he existed. He stood at the stove, 1 pan, 2 eggs. The kind of breakfast a man makes when he's learned to stop grieving the breakfasts he used to imagine. The kitchen was small, clean. Everything had a place, but everything having a place was the only kind of control he had left. A drawing on the refrigerator, a rover with wheels the size of dinner plates and a flag on top that said Imani 1. Sticky from a 7-year-old's handwriting. Don't forget lunch, Dad. He hadn't forgotten lunch in 7 seas. He wouldn't start today. She appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:12. Imani Okafor, 7 years old, wearing her school uniform crooked and her left shoe on her right foot, and carrying a plastic container of circuit boards, like it was the most important thing in any room she'd ever walked into, which, to be fair, it probably was. You're listening to the left, without turning around. Shoes on the wrong foot. I know. She sat down at the table, didn't fix the shoe. I was testing something. Testing what? Whether it matters. He turned around and looked at her. She looked back at him with her mother's eyes. That particular shade of dark brown that always looked like I was thinking 3 thoughts simultaneously, and only sharing one of them. Does it? He asked. She considered this seriously. But not as much as people say. He put the eggs on the table. She took her fork. For 4 minutes, they ate in the specific silence of 2 people who have been through enough together that they don't need to fill every moment with noise. 4 minutes of just eggs and the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the city waking up outside. Then Imani said, "Today's the day, Dad. I know. Mr. Patterson said that the workshop is definitely opening back up next week." Don kept his face very seriously. And the week before, she poked at her eggs. But this time he sounded more sure about it. Sure. He picked up his coffee. Eat. She ate. He watched her and thought about things he didn't say out loud. Called the school twice and left messages that nobody returned. The way Imani had stopped mentioning the workshop with the 3D printer furniture and the good sword things and so on with fine way she had her mother's exact talent for making the worst circumstances sound like a reasonable situation. We make do with what we have. That had been Renee's line, her whole philosophy in 7 words. Darnell had loved it once. Now sometimes it felt like an instruction manual for accepting less than you deserve. He didn't say any of that. He just poured her a glass of orange juice and said, "Let me see the rover." Her face changed completely. She'd been working on it for 2 months. A small autonomous rover, palm-sized, 6 wheels.
Well, to move from self-voltage and determination and kind of obsessed with what Darkos reckons he'd felt it himself once a long time ago in a different life.
She'd coded the navigation sensors herself, borrowed books from 3 different libraries, watched videos at 2x speed on a tablet with a cracked screen until she understood exactly what she needed to understand. The regional robotics competition was in 3 weeks. First place got a trophy and spot in a national qualifying round. Second and third got small scholarship certificates toward summer STEM programs. But the thing Imani wanted, the real thing, the thing she'd drawn pictures of and practiced her presentation for in the bathroom mirror, was the full scholarship to the Cornell Summer Engineering Camp. A week on a real university campus with real equipment and real engineers who would look at a 7-year-old black girl and say, "Yes, you belong here, keep going." She'd been working in the dark for 2 weeks, under a desk lamp that flickered, with tools Darnell had bought from the hardware store on his way home from work at 7 in the morning, still smelling like cleaning solution, because that was what you did. You made do. He held the rover now, turned it over carefully in his big hands, felt the weight of it, the care. The tiny screws she'd tightened herself with a screwdriver handle wrapped in electrical or tip because the grip was too big for her fingers. "The obstacle navigation is better," he said. "I recoded the sensor array last Thursday. During lunch. The cafeteria is loud anyway." He turned it over again. Something near his sternum pulled in a direction he didn't have a name for. Pride, maybe. Or grief. Or that particular feeling that lived exactly between the two, the one that showed up when looked at his daughter and saw how much of herself she put into and thought, "She got that from you, Renee, not from me." "It's good, baby," he said. "Not good. Extraordinary." But he kept that one inside because the Mamani would roll her eyes and say "Dad" the way only 7-year-olds can. And he didn't want to ruin the moment. "Think I can win?" she asked. He handed the rover back to her. "Yes," he said. "Because that's what our fathers do. They say yes, even when they're not sure. Even the Kino workshop's lights are out and the desk lamp flickers and the world keeps telling you next week, we'll fix it next week. They say yes, and then they figure out how to mean it." He dropped her at school at 7:40. Watched her walk through the front gate with that too big backpack and the container of circuit boards tucked under one arm. She turned around once at the door, not to wave, just to check that he was still there. Still watching. "You what? She went inside. He just sat in there for another 30 lessons. Sat there with his hands on the wheel and the engine running, looking at the front of the school, thinking about the workshop on the 3rd floor that had been dark for 2 weeks because of a wiring issue they said would take a few days to fix. He thought about calling again. He thought about how much good that had done the first 2 times. He put the truck on drive. The night shift at Holt Air at 11. Darnell had been doing this for almost 7 years, long enough that the security guard at the front gate, a man named Bernard who had a daughter in community college and arthritis in his left knee, waved him through without looking up. Long enough that he knew exactly which section of each sign and floor echoed and which sections didn't, depending on what kind of shoes you were wearing. Long enough that the smell of jet fuel and industrial solvent and something that was almost quite white rubber had stopped registering as a smell and become just the atmosphere of the hours between midnight and 7. He changed into his uniform in the locker room. Dark blue pants, gray shirt, Darnell in block letters above the left breast pocket. He laced his boots in the same order he always did, of left first, then right, a habit he'd developed in the army and never managed to break. His locker was mostly empty. A spare uniform. A photograph of Imani taped to the inside of the door. A duffel bag pushed to the back behind a box of cleaning supplies. He looked at the bag for a moment, didn't open it. He took the mop cart and started on the eastern wing. Holt Aerotech occupied a complex the size of several city blocks in upstate New York. Hangars and research labs and testing facilities and a stretch of private tarmac that ran straight as a ruler into the distance. The kind of operation that looked from the outside had always been exactly this large and exactly this successful. Just like it had never been 2 men in a rent space in Georgia trying to build something from nothing. The founder, Elijah Holt, had built it from exactly that. 2 hangars, 1 mechanic, and a vision for civilian rotorcraft that most people told him was either 30 years too early or 30 years too late. They were wrong. He spent 20 years proving it. Then he had a stroke at 62 and handed the whole thing to his daughter, who proceeded to do what nobody expected. She didn't settle, didn't merge, didn't bring in a management team from outside to send and let them strip the culture out of it in the name of efficiency. She walked into the board meeting at 28 years old, laid a restructuring plan on the table, and dared anyone to argue with the numbers. Half the board walked out. She didn't stop them. 6 years later, Holt Harris Tefart was more probable than it had ever been under Elijah. The press called her the steel ceiling, the woman you couldn't get past, the executive who had turned her father's company into something entirely her own. She had fired 12 executives in 6 years. None of them saw it coming. She didn't believe in warnings. She believed in results. Darnell didn't think about Celeste Holt when he mopped floors. He thought about Imani's rover, about whether the wheel calibration needed about whether he could get the truck brake pads replaced before they became an actual problem, about whether Renee would have been proud of him or just quietly sad for him and this was the one he tried hardest not to sit with, both. He thought about a lot of things at midnight, when the hangar was mostly empty, and the overhead lights buzzed at a frequency that was almost but not quite musical. He did not, as a rule, think about the helicopters. Except tonight. He was mopping the far end of the research wing, a section normally restricted. But a pipe had backed up near the ventilation system, and someone from maintenance had called him in to clean up the wall on the floor, the equipment. Standard. He'd done it before. He pushed the cart down the corridor, past the glass panels that looked into the testing bays, past the photograph on the wall of Holt aircraft over 6 decades, starting with the black and white images of the first prototype that looked like someone had welded a lawnmower engine to a bathtub, and ending with the H-145 gleaming under professional lighting, in a photo that probably cost more to produce than Darnell made in a month. He was almost past the main monitoring station when he saw it. A screen that hadn't been turned off. Stop. Not because he meant to. Not because he planned to look. His body just stopped, the way it used to stop in another life when something in a system was wrong, and his nervous system recognized it before his conscious mind caught up. The screen showed pressure readings, temperature zones, hydraulic flow data for the H-145 prototype currently sitting in Bay 3. He could see it through the glass, gleaming white body, the Holt logo in silver along the tail, engine cowling closed, rotor bloodless still. His eyes went to the pressure readouts. There's a fluctuation in the turbine intake pressure differential. Small, consistent. The kind of thing the automated system wouldn't flag because it hadn't crossed the alert threshold yet. But it was there, cycling every 40 seconds. Small but regular, like a clock. Darnell looked at it for 30 seconds. He knew what it was.
He'd seen it once before, Kandahar, 2004, and season. Chinook had flown through a dust storm and sucked particulate into sulfide, slipped its standard tone with the sound from the filters, and began to accumulate tasks inside the compression chamber. The diagnostic systems had shown nothing because it wasn't an electrical fault. It was physical.
The kind of problem you found with your hands, not your computers. Left alone, the H-145 would pass every ground check they ran, would start fine, would hover fine, would look from every angle the machines could measure, like a perfectly functional airpress. It wasn't. He stood there, hands on the mop handle, looking at the screen, and then he thought about the last time I tried this. 2 months ago. Different wing, different screen, smaller issue. A sensor calibration drift that he'd spotted from across the room on his way to refill a cleaning solution tank. He'd thought about it for 3 days. Then he'd knocked on the door of the on-call engineering office and said quietly to the man at the desk,
I think there might be a pressure sensor issue on a flat 5%.
The engineer had looked up from his laptop, looked at Darnell,
looked at the Darnell on his shirt, looked back up. Thanks, he'd said. We'll look into it.
2 words. Professional. Dismissive in the way that's harder to argue with than actual rudeness, because it doesn't give you anything to push back against. They hadn't looked into it. Darnell had checked the maintenance logs the following week. Nothing flagged. Nothing entered. The word of a janitor it turned up at SR had a particular weight, and that weight was close to nothing. He'd written an anonymous note once, too, left it near the engineering scene. It was gone the next morning. Whether it had been read or thrown away, he never found out. So he stood there now, in front of a screen that was telling him something important, and he ran the calculation that he'd run twice before and arrived at the same answer. Who is going to listen to you? Not rhetorical, genuinely. Who in this building at this hour was going to look at the man with the mop and hear a warning about pressure differential and say, yes? Tell me more. I believe you. He already knew the answer. He picked up the mop. He had 12 more feet of floor to clean. He started cleaning. She appeared at the end of the corridor like something out of a movie that nobody had warned him he was in. Celeste Holt.
At
12:43 in the morning. Wearing a blazer that cost more than Darnell's truck and carrying a tablet with the particular grip of a woman who slept with it and didn't find that strange. She was 34 years old and looked like someone had made a person entirely out of precision. Sharp cheekbones, sharp posture, sharp eyes that moved across a room the way a pilot scans instruments, fast, systematic, missing nothing. She saw Darnell. Then she saw where he was standing. The expression that fear on her face wasn't dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was the expression of someone doing a rapid professional assessment and arriving at a conclusion they'd already half expected. Her voice was quite controlled. The kind of quiet that was actually louder than shouting. Darnell stepped back from the screen immediately, cleaning.
You were looking at the date.
No, I was just watching a photo for petty flatus from the end of that hall. She wasn't accusing. She was stating, you were looking at the data. There was a moment, and a small one, barely a breath, where Darnell thought about saying it. About just saying, yes, I was, and there's something you should know. 3 sentences, maybe 4. He looked at her face. He thought about the engineer 2 months ago, about we'll look into it, about the maintenance logs with nothing in them. Custodial area only. I know, I'll stay out. She studied him for another 3 seconds. Her expression didn't change. She turned to the security camera in the upper corner of the room. And he knew, without her saying anything, that there would be a review of the footage by morning. 2 guards appeared. Fast, within 30 seconds. The way they appeared told Darnell they'd already been on standby somewhere nearby, or maybe she had that effect on her to do there's bread in it, just in case. He was escorted out of the wing without another word. He went back to the custodial section. He mopped the floors that needed mopping. He finished his shift at 7 a.m., clocked out, drove home, made breakfast for Imani, and didn't say a word about any of it. Celeste Holt watched the security footage at 1:15 in the morning, alone in her office. The lights of the facility spread out below her window like a small city that she owned and operated and was responsible for in ways that sometimes, at 1 in the morning, felt like a weight she couldn't put down even when she tried. She watched Darnell at the screen, the stillness of him. The way his eyes moved, not the way someone looks at something they don't understand, the way someone looks at something they recognize. She made a note in a folder she kept for personnel observations. Then she went back 11 minutes in the footage because something the security team had mentioned was nagging at her. She found it. Earlier in the evening, before the restricted wing, before any of this, there had been a hydraulic fluid spill near the catwalk on level 2. A maintenance technician and Quinn had slipped on it, cut his hand on the edge of a tool cart, gone down hard. Darnell Okafor had been 20 feet away. She watched him cross the floor, crouch down next to Quentin. Help him up slowly, checking his hand without touching the cut directly. Say something. She couldn't read lips well enough to catch it, but Quentin laughed a little. Then Darnell reached into his jacket pocket and gave the man half of something wrapped in foil, his sandwich. And he walked Quentin all the way to the medical station on level 1. Stayed outside until Quentin came out with his hand bandage, said something else, nodded. Nobody else was. Celeste watched the clip twice. Then she saw the personnel file she called up. Okafor Daniel James. Employee ID 4291. Hired 7 years ago. Night custodial. She'd never specifically looked at his file before. She had 312 employees and she knew every department head and every free senior engineer and every board member and the names of approximately nobody who pushed a mop, which was, she realized, exactly the point. She closed the file, saved the clip, went back to the quarterly projection she'd been reviewing. Tells herself she'd forgotten about it. She hadn't forgotten about it. 3 weeks passed. Darnell came in at 11 and left at 7. He mopped floors and replaced burned-out lighting panels and cleaned up after the engineers who left but coffee cups on equipment that explicitly said no beverage. He dropped Imani at school. He picked her up. He read her bedtime stories about astronauts and structural engineers, and one recurring as a saga. Imani had invented herself about a girl who builds the robot that saves a small town from a drainage problem. He fell asleep on the couch 3 nights out of 5 and woke up at 2 a.m. with a crick in his neck and Imani's tablet still playing YouTube tutorials as a sensor dress is seated. He thought about the pressure reading. He checked the public maintenance logs twice. Nothing flagged. He thought about Imani's rover, about the workshop lights, about how she stopped mentioning it the same way she seems to stop mentioning a lot of things. The way she'd learned to stop wanting things that weren't coming.
He didn't say anything about Station 45.
He kept his head down. Invisible was safe. Invisible was simple. Invisible was Vazaman who got to pick his daughter up from school every afternoon and read her a bedtime story and watch her biddled rovers in the dark under a flickering disk lamp and tell himself that was enough, that it was more than enough. He told himself that. He kept telling himself that. The morning of the demo, he was already in the building when the call came through. Not to him, he wasn't the kind of person calls came to. But he heard it in the way you hear things in large spaces when voice carry and nobody's paying attention to whether the man with the mop is listening. He heard the urgency first, the particular sound of professional people shifting from calm to controlled alarm, footsteps changing tempo, voices dropping lower, which always meant the problem was bigger, not smaller. He kept mopping, but his hands slowed. Within 20 minutes, the main hangar had transformed from a staging area for a high-value demonstration into something closer to a field hospital. Engineers from the in-house team, contractors brought in special for the demo.
3M and Donald had seen on the facility website in the section of file advisory board. Siususi stood near the AH-145 with their arms crossed, radiating the particular energy of people who were very good at their jobbers and were currently not able to do them.
Diagnostic systems showed nothing wrong. Clean readings across the board. The fuel lines were clear. The electrical system checked out. Everyone wanting to make the test they could run came back normal. The helicopter simply would not start. $40 million. One medical transport company from Seattle. 3 follow-on contracts that depended on this demonstration happening today. Darnell had heard these numbers also. From conversations that nobody was bothering to keep quiet anymore, because the situation had moved past the point where appearances mattered. He was mopping the far wall of the main hangar, and he was not mopping. He was standing still, looking at the H-140 at the engine cowling near the turbine intake, at the way the pressure housing sat relative to the intake manifold. He was seeing something. He knew what was wrong. He had known for 3 weeks. And he was standing there with a mop handle in his hands, thinking about how this was not his problem. He had left that world. He had chosen this world, the night shift and the quiet and the 3 minutes of silence at
4:47 in the morning, because this world let him be there when my mind needed him.
He was not going back.
He had decided.
He had absolutely decided.
Dad,
can you fix anything that's broken? Yes, even stuff that seems really, really broken. Especially that. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. He opened them. He was still looking at the helicopter. He didn't hear her approach, which was impressive given the heels. But Susan Holt moved through a room like the room rearranged itself around her rather than her navigating it. And by the time Darnell registered her presence, she was already 5 feet away, looking at him, looking at the H-145. She'd been watching him for 10 minutes. She didn't say that, but he knew. "You've been staring at it for a while," she said. Her voice was exactly as controlled as he remembered. Smooth surface, deep water underneath. "Just cleaning, ma'am. You stopped cleaning 8 minutes ago." Didn't say anything. Around them, engineers exchanged glances. Someone had their phone out. Another person checked their watch. The atmosphere had that specific quality of a room full of smart people who have run solutions and are now watched to see what the person since in charge will do next. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the thing nobody in that hangar expected her to say. "Fix this helicopter." Her voice was clear and cold and carried across the airspace without her raising it by a single degree. "I'll kiss you right now in front of everyone."
Silence.
The kind of silence which near the vision. "You fail," she continued.
"You're fired. No severance. No insurance.
No final paycheck." She crossed her arms. "Do we have a deal?" A senior engineer, Darnell had heard someone call him Doctor. Mercer, Caltech, 23 years with the company, stepped forward. "With respect, he's a janitor. He doesn't have clearance too. I know what he is." She didn't look at kept her eyes on Darnell. "Do we have a deal?" Darnell looked at her, at the H-145, at his hands. He thought about Imani on the phone saying, "I have my flashlight, Dad." He thought about Renee saying, "We make do with what we have," like it was wisdom and not surrender. He thought about a Kandahar night in 2014 when the temperature was 43 degrees and the rotor woofed and 7 men needed that aircraft to move, and the only person who knew how to make it move was him. He set down the mop. He didn't say a word.
He walked toward the H-45.
The engineer stepped back. Not all at once. One by one, like water moving around something solid. Darnell stopped in front of the helicopter. He stood there for a moment, just looking. The way he always looked first. Before tools. Before analysis. Before anything else. Just looking, letting his eyes move over them the way they'd been trained to move. The way 7 years in the army teaches a man to see things that other people walk past. He reached up and ran his hand along the engine cowling, feeling the metal, the seams, the bolts. And for the first time in 7 years, Darnell Okafor stopped being a janitor. He walked to his locker. He opened the duffel bag he'd kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies for 7 years. The one he'd told himself 100 times he should sell. The one he'd never been able to let go of. He unzipped it slowly. The tools were clean, exactly as he'd left them. A ratchet wrench with a hand-wrapped grip, a digital torque gauge, precision screwdrivers in descending order, a fiber-optic inspection camera he'd won in a poker game outside Kandahar from a Marine who'd underestimated him. 3 times, he picked up the wrench. It fit in his hand like it had never left. He carried the bag back to the hangar floor. He set it beside the H-145, crouched down, and got to work. No one spoke. That was the thing nobody would remember correctly afterward. When they told this story, the way people tell stories, with embellishment, with drama, with themselves positioned more centrally than they'd actually been. They'd remember cheering, maybe, or murmuring, some kind of noise. But in that first minute, picking up his first tool and beginning to remove the engines and cowling with the calm, systematic confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times in conditions considerably worse than this, there was nothing. Just the sound of a torque wrench, and 21 people holding their breath. Celeste Holt stood 15 feet away, arms still crossed, face still unreadable, but her eyes didn't move from his hands. And for a reason she wouldn't name, not yet, not today, she found herself thinking about a file she'd almost opened 7 years ago. A name she had for a few later, a decision she'd made in a week full of hard decisions and never revisited. Since mechanical engineering, GPS-3, warrant officer, rotary wing system. She watched him work, and something in her chest, something she'd built very carefully over a very long time, developed a small, specific crack. She didn't move. She didn't show it, but it was there. It was 11:47 a.m. Darnell had thousands in Rosdosvenas. He thought Malani. He picked up the neck hold conco, and the crash on Celeste Holt's chest spread quietly, without drama, without announcement, like water finding its way through concrete. The way it always does. The way it always will. 11:47 a.m. was what? Not a lot. Not nothing. Exactly enough, if everything went right. If his hands remembered what his brain had spent 7 years trying to forget.
If the problem was what he thought of, was there not something worse underneath?
If. Darnell didn't do ifs. He did the next thing. The next thing, and after that.
One bolt at a time.
One connection. One step. That was how you got through impossible situations. Not by solving the whole thing at once. By refusing to look at the whole thing at once. He'd learned that in the army. He'd relearned it the morning he found Renee. He wasn't going to think about that right now. Next thing. The first thing was the cowling. 6 bolts, specific torque sequence, wrong order, and you warped the housing. Warped housing meant a bad seal. Bad seal meant the whole repair was worthless before it started. He worked left to right, top to bottom. The ratchet wrench moved in his hand like it belonged there, which it did, which it always had. Which was the thing that nobody in this hangar understood. The man that they'd been watching law floors for God knows how long was not the janitor who happened to know how colorless. He was an engineer who happened to be moth floors. There's a difference, a significant one. The cowling came free at 11:55. He set it on the clean tarp he'd spread on the floor beside him. Careful, deliberate, the way you hand something expensive that isn't yours. He heard someone whisper something behind him. Couldn't make out the words, didn't try. Dr. Mercer had not left. Darnell could feel him standing there, about 12 feet back, arms folded, radiating the specific energy of a man who needed Darnell to fail. Not out of cruelty, necessarily. Out of something more complicated and more human than cruelty. Because if Darnell succeeded, if a man put up in one of his flaws, if there's in the problem that 3 Ivy League engineers couldn't find in 3 hours, then something very uncomfortable was going to have to be acknowledged. And Dr. Mercer had spent a long time being comfortable. Darnell had met men like him before. Not evil, not stupid, just calcified. Set in the shape of their certainties. Certain that excellence looked a particular way. Wore a particular kind of clothes. Came from a particular kind of background. He didn't hate Dr. Mercer. He just didn't have time for him.
Next thing.
The electrical harness. 12 connections, color-coded. But the color coding on Holt aircraft used the civilian standard, which was slightly different from the military standard Darnell had worked with for 6 years. He'd noticed this the first time he'd looked under a Holt cowling, years ago, before the night shifts, before all of it. He'd read the technical manuals the way other people read novels, because he couldn't stop, because his brain wouldn't let him. He tagged each connection with small pieces of tape from his kit, numbers, left to right. So when he reassembled, he didn't have to think. He just had to follow the tape. Think before. Follow the sequence after. Thinking during was when mistakes happened. He disconnected the last connection at 12:09. 22 minutes since he started. Around him, the hangar had reached a specific quality of quiet that Darnell recognized from operating theaters and field significance at other places where people understood that interrupting a man who knows what he's doing is worse than whatever you were going to say. Even the master had stopped whispering. The valve housing was next. This was the hard part. Not because it was technically complex. He'd removed valve housing, the dark on sands, in temperatures that made the metal burn to touch. Not because of the pressure. He didn't feel the pressure the way other people did. Pressure was just time moving fast. You either kept up or you didn't. The hard part was that this was where he'd find out if he was right. 3 hydraulic lines and a sensor array. 1 mounting bracket with a thread that always stripped if you weren't careful. And this particular bracket had a wear pattern that told him it had been overtorqued at some point in the recent past. Recent. Within the last 6 months, probably. He worked around it. Patient Sanesh used to say he was the most would be Roxy. She wasn't wrong. The housing came free at 12:23. He carried it to the workbench, set it down, opened it, and there it was. A fine metallic dust coating the interior surfaces of the pressure regulation chamber. Almost invisible in standard lighting. Almost. But Darnell had a small flashlight in his kit. It's the same one he used to check into sinks and behind vending machines at 2 a.m. And under that beam, the dust caught light like frost. He'd been right. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Not relief exactly. More like the particular feeling of a door opening that you'd been certain was locked. Behind him, he heard someone step closer. He didn't turn around. He looked at the dust. Thought about Kandahar. Thought about a night that smelled like burning diesel and cold mountain air, and the specific fear that lives in your chest when you know that if you get this wrong, 7 people don't come home. Different desert. Except time the stakes were $40 million at his daughter's workshop lights, which, if he was being honest, felt more urgent. He turned around, looked at Celeste first, then at the gathered engineers. It's the pressure valve. His voice was level. Calm the way deep water is calm, not because nothing is happening beneath it. There's a blockage. Metallic dust in the compression chamber. You won't find it on the diagnostic because it's not a sensor issue. It's a physical obstruction. Then, Dr. Mercer, we ran a full system purge this morning. Not deep enough. Donald turned back to the workbench. You need to clean the interior surfaces manually and check the compressor intake for residue accumulation. If you don't, it'll cycle fine on the ground. Under load in flight, it'll fail. 3 days, maybe less.
Oxford lab, maybe 30 forward.
And you know, this is how exactly. Donald didn't answer. He picked up a microfiber cloth and the aviation-grade solvent from his kit.
Miss Holt.
The Oxford engineer directed his question at Celeste. Are we seriously? Clock is running. Her voice cut him off like a blade finding a seam. Let him work. He cleaned. It was not a dramatic process. There was nothing cinematic about a man with a cloth and a solstum working thoughtfully across a metal surface. It was slow, it was careful. It required patience that most people had to perform. For Darnell, it wasn't performance. It was just how he moved through work that mattered. He used the fiber optic camera between passes. Checking, rechecking.
The kind of thoroughness that looks over caution until you just understand that what looks like caution in a maintenance bay
Is the reason people come home from places they weren't supposed to survive. The dust came away in layers. Thin ones. Almost translucent under the camera.
It's an ammunition that builds gradually over time, weeks, maybe months, until one day the accumulation reaches critical mass and a $40 million helicopter refuses to start the morning of the most important demonstration your company has had in 3 years. He worked. He didn't think about the engineers behind him. He didn't think about Celeste Holt watching. He didn't think about Dr. Mercer and the specific quality of his silence. He thought about the problem, only the problem, until his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He should not have answered. But the ringtone was the one he'd set specifically for Monty. Notes. And the same little tune she used to hum when she was 2 years old and didn't have words yet. He'd recorded it on a voice memo, made it her ringtone. He'd never cast it and he could not answer it. He set down the cloth, peeled off one glove, picked up. Dad, hey, baby. The workshop is still closed. He turned slightly away from the hangar, kept his voice level. What did Mr. Patterson say? He said next week. A pause. The specific pause of a child choosing not to sound upset. That's the 4th time he said next week. Darnell closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. I know. It's okay, I have on my flashlight. Another pause. Mom always, we make do with what we have, right? The thing that happened is just in that moment and didn't have a name. Or maybe it had too many names. He said. Dad, you sound good, baby. He put everything he had into keeping his what he said he. I'll see you tonight. Okay, she was whispered for a moment. I love you. I love you too. Go learn something. I always learn something. I know you do. He hung up, stood with his back to the hangar for 5 seconds. Then he turned around, put his glove back, picked up the cloth, and he worked faster. Not reckless, never reckless, but faster, tighter. With the specific focus of a man who has just remembered, with absolute clarity, exactly what he's doing this for. She's been building in the dark for 2 weeks. She's 7 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's way of making the worst things sound reasonable. She should not have to make do. Not anymore. From 50 feet ago, Celeste watched him hang up the phone. She watched the 5 seconds he stood at the back of the room. She watched him turn around, put the glove back on, pick up the cloth, and she watched something shift in the way he moved. Still precise, still controlled, but faster, more concentrated. The way a fire burns when you give it more air. She didn't know who had called. She had a feeling she was about to find out. She kept watching. The compressor tank was worse. Harder to access. Barely enough room for his arm. He had to remove a secondary panel. 4 more bolts, different head size. He had the right driver. And then reach in blind. Guided only by muscle memory and the vacuum probe that pulled whatever was in there out into the collection canister. His shoulder started aching at the 20-minute mark. The angle was wrong. The concrete was hard on his knees. Sweat was running down his left temple into his ear, which was the kind of specific discomfort that would have been deeply irritating in any other context. In this context, he barely noticed. She was thinking about the intake geometry, about the way the dust would have settled. Heaviest accumulation near the bottom of the chamber, lighter deposits along the upper curve. He was working from the bottom up, which was slower but more thorough. The vacuum probe moved in small overlapping pulses. He could feel the resistance change as it found thicker deposits and bulk. At 1:14, he pulled his arm out, the canister. He held it up to the light, a thin uniform coat of metallic dust, fine as talcum powder, visible only because the light caught it at exactly the right angle. He'd gotten it all. He was sure. He'd learned in Afghanistan to be sure. Reassembly was the part nobody appreciated. Taking something apart was relatively forgiving. Putting it back together was where everything that mattered happened. Every connection had to be exact. Every bolt had to be torqued to spec. One shortcut, one bolt 3 degrees under torque, one sensor connector not fully seated, and the repair was decorative. The system would fail. Maybe on the ground, maybe in the air, maybe over the. He didn't shortcut. He never had. He reconnected the hydraulic lines in reverse order. He'd removed them. Reattached the sensor array. Plugged in the electrical harness following his tape markers, left to right. Each connection pressed fully home until he felt the click that meant it was seated. He removed the tape as he went, folded each piece, put it in his breast pocket. Old habit. Leave the worst base cleaner than you found it. He ran a manual pressure test with the gauge from his kit at 1:38 ppm. Watched the needle climb. Smooth, no hesitation, no fluctuations. The liners was clean and stayed clean. Good. Clip. He closed the valve housing, Torque constant volts.
In the correct sequence, cross pattern, 3 passes, incremental pressure each time. The bracket with the worn thread got extra attention, extra care. He could feel the moment it reached true torque, that specific vibration through metal that told him the connection was right. Replaced the secondary panel. 4 bolts. Correct driver. Correct sequence. He lifted the engine cowling. Heavy. Heavier than he remembered, or maybe he was tireder than he thought. He fitted it to the houses and aligned the bolt holes by feel. Tossed out by mold by hand before touching the wrench. Cross-threaded bolt on a cowling was the kind of problem that turned a good repair into a catastrophe. All 6 bolts correct. Sequence. Left to right, top to bottom. He stepped back. 1:50 p.m. 23 minutes to spare. He became aware of the room again. It had grown. When it started, there had been maybe 20 people in the hangar. Now there were closer to 40. Word had traveled the way word travels in large international facilities, person to person, in low voices, through doorways and down corridors. See this? That's his temp. There's a janitor in Bay 1 fixing the H-145. He could feel them all. The weight of their attention. The particular quality that does it does, and whether it's about to see something remarkable or something embarrassing, and is holding its breath for the answer. He wiped his hands on a rag, looked at Celeste. Try it now. The hangar went very quiet. Celeste Holt walked to the pilot's door of the H-45. She climbed into the seat with the ease of someone who had done this many times, not surprising given who her father was. She reached for the ignition panel. Darnell stood beside the aircraft, not watching the cockpit, watching the engine housing. Celeste activated the ignition sequence. The starter motor wound up, a rising whine that filled the hangar. The turbine caught, slowly at first, then with momentum, then with the deep building roar of an engine that was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Every component running clean, efficiency nominal, every valve and seal and connection working together the way they were supposed to work. The rotor blades began to move, slowly, then faster, then up to speed, that heavy rhythmic thudding that Darnell had grown up with, had lived with for 6 years. That sound that meant everything was working and the aircraft was alive and the people depending on it were going to be okay. Stage 1 soft after lifted. 6 inches, clean and level, not a wobble, not a drift. Just the helicopter hovering in the space between the floor and the air like it had made a private agreement with gravity. Then Celeste brought it back down. Smooth, controlled, killed the engine. The rotor slowed, stopped, silence. Complete ringing, absolute silence. And then somebody exhaled, and somebody else's in. The Oxford's engine is the one years 7 assistants know this how exactly. Sat down heavily on a nearby equipment case and looked at the floor. Dr. Mercer didn't say anything. He just turned and walked toward the exit at the far end of the hangar. Not running, not storming out, just leaving. Like a man who needed to go somewhere and be alone with something uncomfortable for a while. Darnell watched him go and felt nothing specific, no satisfaction, no vindication, just clean feeling of a problem solved. This thing that had been broke, that was now fixed. The absence of the wrong note. That was enough. Celeste climbed out of the cockpit. She walked toward him. Every phone in the hangar was up, recording. People who had been muttering to each other a minute ago had gone silent again. Because they knew, everybody in that room knew, that they were about to see something. They just didn't know what. They were expecting a kiss, or a confrontation, or the moment when the ice queen aviation made good on a bet she probably hadn't said back so got something else. Celeste stopped 3 feet in front of Darnell. She looked at him. He looked at her. Her expression was complicated, not unreadable the way it usually was. More like multiple things were happening on her face at the same time, and she hadn't yet decided which one was appropriate. The hangar waited. Darnell peeled off his gloves, slowly, 1 finger at a time. He looked at them and said, "Nobody in that room expected him to say, I don't need your kiss." His voice was quiet, but in that silence it carried like it had weight, like it occupied actual space. Celeste went very still. "I need the lights in my daughter's workshop turned back on." He held her gaze without flinching, without anger, without anything except the civic exhaustion of a man who has been patient for a very long time. She's 7 years old. She's been building in the dark for 2 weeks. Her flashlight is almost out of batteries. He paused. "That's all I want. Not money, not a promotion, not your kiss. Just lights so my daughter can finish her project." The silence stretched out. Someone's phone beeped. Nobody moved to silence it. A young engineer, late 20s, She'd been filming with her phone the whole time, lowered the phone. Slowly. Like the weight of it had just increased. Another engineer looked at the floor. The Oxford lanyard man just took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. And Settle stood 3 feet away from a man who had just fixed what $40 million worth of engineering consultants couldn't fix in 3 hours, and turned down the only thing she'd offered him, and asked for something so small it should have been embarrassing for her. Her throat moved. The only visible sign of anything. Done. Wood came out quieter than she intended, harder around the edges. She was trying to hold too many things at once, and the wood was the only part she could manage. The lights will be on tonight, you have my word. Darnell nodded. Once. Short. The nod of a man who doesn't need to make a speech about it. He turned back to his workbench, started putting his tools away, one by one, ratchet wrench, torque gauge, screwdrivers in descending order. He moved through its moved through the repair, methodical, unhurried. Like the audience wasn't there. Like the phones weren't recording. Like none of this was the most significant thing that had happened in this hangar in a long time. He zipped the duddable bag, picked it up, carried it back toward the custodial section. Celeste stood where he'd left her, for longer than she should have, 3 feet from the H-145, in the middle of the hangar floor, with 40 people around her who were all very deliberately looking at her because as they understood on some cellular level that she needed a moment and they valued their continued employment. She stood there, and thought about a file she'd almost opened 7 years ago. BSS Mechanics Engineering JP3 9, Warrant Officer, Rotary Wing Aircraft Systems. Reason for discharge, personal family matter. She thought about the maintenance logs she'd reviewed after the first incident. Clean. Nothing flagged. Because nobody had listened when he tried to say something. Because nobody had asked. Because he was the man with the mop. And the man with the mop didn't get to have opinions about the helicopter. She had built that system. She had run it for 6 years. She had been proud of her efficiency, her precision, her ability to put the right people in the right places. Except she hadn't. She'd had the person in the wrong place for 7 years, and it had taken a $40 million crisis for her to let him show her. She turned and walked toward her office. Her heels echoed. Nobody spoke until she was through the door. Her office overlooked the facility through a wall of windows. She stood at the glass and looked down at the hangar floor. She could see the H-145. She could see the remaining engineers dispersing slowly, in small groups, talking in low voices. She could see the spot on the floor where Darnell had stood, the clean top he'd spread out, already folded and put away. She thought about his face when he said, "I don't need your kiss." Not angry, not triumphant, just tired, just done. Just a man who had been through enough that public humiliation barely registered as notable. That was the part she couldn't shake. Not that she underestimated him. People underestimated people. It happened. It was a failure, but it was a human one. What she couldn't shake was the particular quality of how he'd looked when he said it. This was not the worst thing that had happened to him today. Like this barely cracked up to top 10. He had a whole taxonomy of being overlooked and dismissed and sent back to his section. And today was just another entry. She had done that. Not alone, not on purpose. But she had done it. She opened a computer, pulled up his file. Read it this time. All of it. Renee Okafor, née Williams, registered, married 2014. Daughter Imani, born 2017. Renee Okafor, deceased 2018. Reason for discharge, personal family matter. He read between those lines, understood what lived. A baby 7 months old. A man who came home from a war and walked into a different kind of impossible. A man who had folded everything he was into a shirt with his name embroidered above the pocket, so his daughter could go to school with a packed lunch and come home to a father who was there every day. Without fail, without seeing anyone to do this. She closed the doors the phone out to fuel. Walked supermarket, facilities manager, the workshop at PS 114. Light it up tonight, all of it. I don't care what it costs. Get it done by 6. Yes, ma'am, may I ask? No, she hung up, sat back in her chair, looked at the ceiling, and thought about a little girl she'd never met who was going home tonight to a workshop full of light, and about a man who had asked for nothing else, and about all the things she had been measuring with the wrong instruments for a very long time. At 6:11, Imani Okafor walked into the 3rd floor workshop at PS 114 and stopped in the doorway. All the lights were on, every single one. Darnell stood behind her. He'd gotten there early, drove straight from Holt Etetek, still smelling faintly of solvent. Still had grease under one fingernail that he'd missed. He'd wanted to see her face. She stood in the doorway, her backpack straps in both hands, the container of circuit boards tucked under her arm. She didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Then she turned around, looked up at him. Did do this? Thought about the hangar, about the H-145, about Celeste Holt's face when he said just the lights.
About Steve's tools in the duffel bag and the pressure valve and the five-optical camera. Then the 3 seconds he'd stood in front of a screen at midnight 3 weeks ago and decided the answer was no.
Yeah, he said. Imani looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked into the workshop, set her backpack down, put the circuit board container on the workbench, pulled up a stool, and the work. Darnell leaned against the doorframe, watched her. The light was good in there, clean and even. The kind of light you could work under without your eyes aching after 20 minutes. The sense of light that made small components visible and fine soldering possible, and the details of a sensor array clear enough for a 7-year-old with excellent hands and a tremendous amount of determination. The kind of light that shouldn't have been hard to come by. That had only taken a helicopter and about 7 years of visible mornings. Watch her work. Not for the first time, and not for the last. That Renee would have loved this, would have sat right there beside her, asking questions, learning the rover's systems the way she learned everything. Thoroughly, with patience. With the particular delight of a person who finds other people's obsessions genuinely interesting. We make do with what we have. He'd been getting that wrong. All this time. Renee hadn't said it as instruction, hadn't meant it as a scene, as a starting point. You start with what you have, and then you fight for more. And then you use the more to go further. You don't stop at make do. He'd been stopping at make do. Imani looked up from the workbench, caught him watching her. You okay, Dad? Yeah, baby. She studied him. Those eyes, Renee's eyes. You look like you're thinking about something big. Just watching you work. She accepted this. Looked back at her rover. Adjusted something with a small screwdriver. Checked the calibration for reading on the sensor display. Dad, thank you for the lights. He looked at his daughter in the light that should have been on 2 weeks ago. Darn thing, he said. Just win. She smiled.
Didn't look up. I was going to anyway. Miles away in a glass penthouse in Manhattan, Celeste Holt sat at her kitchen counter at 11:15 p.m. with his laptop open
And a cup of tea that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. Was looking at the school website for PS114. There was a section about their STEM programs. A photograph of the workshop, good lighting, good equipment. A paragraph about the regional robotics competition coming up in 3 weeks. There was a name in the paragraph. Imani Okafor, grade 2, building an autonomous rover with self-coded navigation sensors. Celeste looked at the photograph of the workshop for a long time. Then she opened a new browser tab and started making a different kind of calculation. She didn't sleep that night. Not unusual. She hadn't slept well in years. But usually the sleeplessness had a productive quality. Her brain working through contracts, restructuring timelines, quarterly rejections that refused to resolve cleanly. The kind of insomnia that at least produced something. This was different. This was just her.
lying on back at the penthouse that cost more per month than most people made in a year.
Staring at the ceiling she'd chosen carefully because she'd read somewhere that neutral tones promoted rest. Thinking about a man who had asked for lights. Just lights. Not recognition. Not an apology. Not money or a title or even the basic acknowledgement that he was owed something significant after 7 years of being invisible as the building where his skills dwarfed everyone else in it. Just lights for his daughter. Celeste turned onto her side, looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan at midnight was never dark, just a different kind of bright. The kind that looked like light but wasn't warm. The kind you could stare at for hours and still feel like you were sitting in the dark. She understood that feeling, more than she'd ever admitted to anyone. Elijah about her father, 68 years old, recovering from a stroke in a house in Connecticut that Celeste had bought him and visited 4 times in the last 2 years. 4 times, in 2 years. Each visit under 90 minutes, each one structured like a board update. Here's what's happening. Here's the plan. Here's how we're performing against projections. She hadn't once asked him if he was lonely. She sat up, picked up her phone, looked at it for a long moment. She did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She dialed without rehearsing what she was going to say first. It rang 4 times. She expected voicemail. It was nearly midnight. He went to bed early since the stroke. Doctor's orders. He picked up on the 5th ring. Baby. His voice, low and warm and slightly rough from sleep. The voice that had read her bedtime stories about aircraft after wind currents and the physics of light since she was 7 years old, and thought of Father knew everything in the world. I know, Dad, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I was awake. She doubted that. She didn't say so. Dad. She stopped. Start again. When you were building the company, in the beginning, did you ever look past someone because of how they looked, or where they came from, or what they were wearing when they walked in the door? Silence on the line. Not the silence of a man who didn't understand the question. The silence of a man who understood it exactly and was deciding how honest to be. More times than I want to admit, he said finally. Why? I think I've been doing it. For years. For the city. I think I've been doing it without even knowing. His voice shifted, became something older. Something he didn't use in their professional conversations. Tell me what happened. So she did. All of it. The file from 7 years ago. The man with the mop. The helicopter that wouldn't start. The 2 hours and 13 minutes. The moment he turned down her offer and asked for lights instead. She told her father all of it. And Elijah listened without interrupting once, which was not a thing he typically did. He was a man who had opinions and expressed them with frequency. But he listened now, all the way through. And when she finished, the silence on the line was different from the silence at the beginning. Fuller, heavier in a way that wasn't bad. How do you fix it? She asked. Baby? She could hear him settling in his chair, the sound of a man getting comfortable for a real conversation. You stop by admitting it, then you stop making the same choice twice. Is that enough? No, but it's where everything else begins. They talked for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Not about the company, not about projections or contracts or the Seattle deal. About her mother. About what it had been like for him after she died. About whether Celeste had ever actually grieved it or had just reorganized around the loss the way you move furniture around a hole in the floor and call it redecorating. About the fact that she had 3 phone numbers saved in her personal cell. Her assistant. Her lawyer. His nurse. I should be in that list, he said. You should, she agreed. She added him while he was still on the line. He heard the small sound of it happening. Didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to. She hung up at 1:47 a.m., lay back down. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept. Not because anything was fixed. Nothing was fixed yet. But because she had stopped pretending anything wasn't broken. And there is a particular kind of rest that comes only from that. From finally putting down something you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. She slept. And outside, Manhattan kept its lights on. The way it always did. Different to the small, significant things that happened behind the glass. An she was in the employee parking lot at 6:52. She told herself she was doing a walkthrough audit control. She was the CEO. The parking lot was her parking lot. Every square foot of this facility was her responsibility. She was absolutely not looking for anyone in particular. She found him in the far corner. An old Ford F-150 with a dent in the rear panel and a faded military veteran sticker on the bumper. She knew the truck, had made herself learn it. Which was, she acknowledged quietly to herself, not something a CEO did for reasons of quality control. He was under the truck, just his boots visible, work boots. Lights left at first, then right. Tools spread on the asphalt beside him, organized, everything in its place. Her heels clicked on the pavement. The boots went still. He slid out from under the truck. Sat up, saw. His expression moved through several assessment. Then the sorrowful stillness of a man who had learned not to show his reactions to people who have had power over his livelihood. Miss Holt. She said it before she could think about it, then stood by it. I owe you an apology. He waited. What I did in that hangar was wrong. The words came out stiffer than she wanted.
She thought about this all day. Had turned it over and over. None of the versions she'd rehearsed survived contact with his actual face. I used you. I made you a spectacle. I turned your skill into a joke and your dignity into a bet in front of 40 people with their phones out.
She paused. That was cruel, and I'm sorry. Donald Balasatasans on her rag. Looked at her directly.
Not angry. Not crazy, sir. Just honest.
I didn't fix that helicopter for you.
I know. I did it for Imani. I know that too. She held his gaze. That's what most makes it worse. Something moved in his expression. small, like a door opening just enough to let air through. Did she win? I asked.
Competition's in 3 weeks. Right, she knew that. She'd looked up the school website more than once. But the workshop, lights were on when we got there. Something came into his face, warm and private, not entirely meant for her. She stood in the door, waited for 10 seconds. Just looked at it. Then she walked in and got to work. Celeste felt her throat tighten. Good, she said, which was about 1/10 of what she meant. Darnell looked at her for a moment, then looked at the truck, at the tools on the asphalt. Brake pads, he said. Rear left, getting thin. Can you fix it? He looked at her sideways, that corner of the mouth. I can fix most things, he said. Not a bust, just a fact. The way she stated everything. She looked at him standing there in the parking lot light, in his work clothes with grease on his hands and tools laid out in order on the asphalt. And she thought about the file, about the photograph stapled to the inside, a younger version of this man in an interview suit. The kind you buy when you're trying to rush off a sort. Can't you try stress carefully since the night before and hang on the back of the door so it doesn't wrinkle? Or she thought about what it must have taken to walk into a building with that file, with those commendations and that degree and 6 years of keeping men alive in conditions she'd never have to imagine. And to be told in the quiet efficiency that systems have of telling people things without anyone saying them directly, that what he here was a night janitor, and to come back the next night anyway, because his daughter needed the paycheck, and the hours. The other was there. Had your system that did her brother. She needed to sit with that, not explain it away, not contextualize it, just sit with it. Thank you, she said, for not making this harder than it needs to be. He looked at her. Thank you for showing up. She nodded, turned to leave, then stopped, turned back. It's because there was one more thing. The thing she'd almost lost her nerve on 3 times on the drive over done. I looked at her for a full file today, not just the qualifications. She kept her voice steady. I read about your wife. He was very still. I'm not going to say I understand what that was. I don't. She looked at him directly. But I want you to know that I see what you chose. After. What you gave up and what you kept and why. She paused. I don't think I could have done what you did. Unslaine's belief in them was different now. Not the silence of 2 people on opposites of something. Just 2 people, standing in a parking lot, in the ordinary light of an ordinary evening, telling each other the truth. She would have loved Imani's Rover, he said finally. She would have asked about every single component, stayed up half the night learning how the sensors worked. He looked at something past Celeste's shoulder, something she couldn't see. She was like that. Whatever you was interested in, she became interested in. So you never peeled. Celeste didn't say anything, because some things don't need a response. They just need to be received. He looked back at her, nodded once, short. She walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands on the wheel, not starting the engine. She was not going to cry. She hadn't cried since her mother's funeral, and she was not going to cry in her parking lot. She started the engine and drove home. And she thought about a woman she'd never met who asked questions about how everything is so that the people she loved never felt alone in what they cared about. And she thought about what it meant that a man who had loved a woman like that could still choose every single day to show up, to keep going, to make pancakes and pack lunches and read bedtime stories and believe that was enough of a life to be worth living. She thought about her own penthouse, the carefully chosen neutral ceiling, the 3 phone numbers. More than, not more money, not more square footage, more of what he has. That thing, that specific, irreplaceable thing that has nothing to do with title or salary, or the size of the company you run. She didn't know yet exactly what to do with that thought, but she kept it. The way you keep something you know is important before you know why. 3 weeks passed. Nell came in at 11 and left at 7. He mopped floors and fixed a ventilation issue in the east wing that had been sitting on the maintenance log for 2 months. He replaced 6 panels in the research corridor. He dropped Imani at school every morning and picked her up every afternoon. 3 nights a week they went to the workshop together. Him on a stool in the corner reading. Her at the workbench, the Rover getting more precise by the day. The never touching response time dropping in measurable increments. She practiced her presentation in the kitchen on the other nights. He asked questions the way judges would ask them. She answered with the patience of someone who had been waiting her whole life for someone to take the questions seriously. The competition was on a Saturday in October. The morning of, Darnell ironed his good shirt, ironed Imani's blouse, made pancakes. Because pancakes were for days that mattered. She ate two. He gave her the rest of his. He asked. She considered this with her characteristicness a little, but mostly I just want to show them what it does. That's exactly the right feeling. Nerves mean you care. Wanting to show them means you're ready. She looked at him across the table. Did you ever get nervous? Every single time, and then... What? And then I did the thing anyway. She picked him, she said, like it was settled. Like that was all she'd ever needed. He watched her eat and thought about the first time she'd asked him a real question. She'd been 3 years old, sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the pieces of a toy she'd taken apart. She'd looked up at him with those serious eyes and said, Dad, things have insides. He had a good answer. He still didn't, really. But he'd sat on the floor and they'd looked at the pieces together. He'd been doing that ever since. The Westchester Community Center smelled like floor wax and folding tables and the particular excitement out of children who had been working towards something for a long time. And banners. Parents with phones pointed at small people who were trying very hard not to look like they were trying very hard. Darnell found a spot along the wall, close enough that Imani could see him if she looked up. Far enough that she didn't feel watched. She looked up twice before the judging started. Both times he was there. Both times she went back to the rover without a word. He didn't see Celeste come in. He recognized her posture first from across the room. That specific way she held herself. Spine that didn't allow for uncertainty. But everything else was different. Dark jeans, a green sweater, no jewelry, no assistant. And a driver waiting outside.
She stood near the back of the room looking for an empty seat with a slightly lost expression of a person who hadn't been to something like this in a very long time. Maybe ever. She found a chair in the last row and sat down.
Looked at the competition tables. Found Imani and went still. Darnell watched her for a moment, then looked back at his daughter. Imani's presentation lasted 12 minutes. He'd heard it 40 times. He knew every word. He still held his breath through every single one. She was good. Not good for her age. Not good considering. Just good. She explained the navigation algorithm the way you explain something you understand from the inside, not the way you recite something you've memorized. She answered every question the judges asked. One of them, a woman with a university lanyard, asked a follow-up that went beyond the prepared material. A real question. The kind asked when you were actually curious. Imani answered. The judge wrote something down. The results came at 3:15 place, second place. Then the Canoes from some team scholarship announced separately. Full on all expenses. Imani Okafor, Pliazwa 14. He heard her name and as his vision went soft at the edges for just a moment. The specific thing that happens when relief is large enough to temporarily overwhelm the body's normal operating system. She was looking at him from across the room, her face completely open. The face she only showed him, without the composure, without the careful management of other people's expectations. Just Imani. He crossed the room in 8 steps, and she ran the last 4, and he picked her up, and she held the certificate above her head with both hands, and he felt her laughing against his shoulder, and he thought, not for the first time, and not for the last. Renee, look what she's going to do. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to.
Some things used to people aren't there anymore. In a perfect grief and gratitude that has no qualities and needs none.
He held his daughter above the folding tables and the half-drawn banners and the parents with their phones.
And he let himself feel it.
All of it, without managing it, without making it smaller so it fit more neatly inside his chest. He was still holding her when Imani said into his ear, "She's here, Dad. I know. She came all the way to Westchester. I know, baby, in regular clothes." He laughed. She was already scanning the room, already moving toward the back row with the particular purposefulness of a 7-year-old who has decided something. He let her go. Celeste was still in her chair. She had not moved during the results. Had stayed very still while Imani's name was called. Had stayed still through the pickup, through the certificate above the head.
She'd watched it the way you watch something that gets through to the defenses you forgot you had. She didn't notice anything coming until the child was still standing directly in front of her, looking up at her with dark as if it were doing that thing, thinking several things at once, sharing one.
You're the lady from the company, Imai said. Celeste looked at her. Yes, Dad's company. He works there. Imani studied her with the thoroughness of someone conducting a formal assessment. Celeste had the distinct sensation of being evaluated by someone considerably more perceptive than most people she dealt with professionally. Are you the one who made my dad prove himself to keep his job? A beat. Celeste didn't look away. Yes. Imani was quiet for a moment, thinking. Dad says some people don't know how to see. He says it's not always because they're bad people. Sometimes it's just because they've been looking the same way for too long. Celeste felt the back of her throat do something complicated. Your dad is very smart, she said, I know. Completely matter of fact. Are you going to be different now?
Not better. Not sorry. Different.
Like she understood that sorry was a word and different was a thing you either did or you didn't.
I'm going to try.
Celeste said. Imani considered this, then nodded. Once, short, exactly like her father. Okay. Then she turned and ran back toward Donnell, certificate still in hand, already looking for someone to show it to. Donnell was standing about 10 feet away. He had heard all of it. He walked over, slowly. He didn't say anything right away. They stood side by side for a moment, watching Imani find a cluster of other kids and immediately begin saying something about her sensor array to a boy who looked both impressed and slightly overwhelmed. She's extraordinary, Celeste said. Yeah, he was his daughter. She is. The question she asked you about seeing. Celeste looked at him. Did you tell her that? About me? No. He glanced at her. I've been telling her that her whole life. It just happened to apply. Celeste was quiet for a moment. Bought the file. Your file. I've been thinking about the week I got it and what I was doing and how I told myself I'd come back to it. You don't have to. I want to say it. She kept her voice level. I tell myself I was overwhelmed, that it was a hard week, that the timing was bad. All of that is true. But it's also true that I probably would have done the same thing on a good week. Because the system our head was running didn't make space for someone who looked like you in the role you deserved. And I built that system. She paused. I want to build a different one. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for coming today, he said. I wouldn't have missed it.
She knew that completely.
Which was the thing that surprised her most about the entire afternoon. That she had driven to Westchester on a Saturday and sat in a folding chair in a community center that smelled like floor wax and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not closing a deal, not running a meeting, not performing competence for a room full of people who needed her to be certain. Just here, just watching, just as person among other people, in a room where a child had built something from almost nothing and was now holding it up for the world to see. A week later, she called him into her office. She had thought about this carefully, had drafted a version where she offered him a senior engineering position, full benefits, 3 times his current salary, had torn it up, because offering him a job, even a good one, was still her deciding what shape his life should take. It was still the same error in different clothes. What she put on the things instead was a 12-page proposal. She had written it herself, at 2 a.m. over 3 nights. She knew it mattered because she hadn't asked her assistant to do it. She hadn't delegated it. She had sat with it alone, in the kitchen with cold tea, until it said what she meant. He came in wearing his work uniform. She'd specifically not asked him to come in anything else. He sat across from her desk, looked around the office the way he looked at everything, methodically. Taking in information, she pushed the forward him. First Flight, she said. A program for recruiting and developing engineers from military backgrounds and non-traditional pathways. Real jobs, real advancement, real mentorship from senior engineers who are actually invested, not checking a box. She kept her eyes on him. I want to build it with you. Not for you. You. If you look the fool to didn't open yet. What? Me? Because you were the most qualified person in this building for 7 fucking years. And the reason nobody knew that is because I built a system that was designed without anyone admitting it to not see you. She let that sit. I'm not asking you to fix my mistake. I'm asking if you want to make sure it stops happening. He opened the folder. Read it. Slowly. The way he did everything. Not looking for what he wanted to hear. Looking for what was actually there. He got to page 7. So stop. The mentorship component, he said. It only works if the senior engineers are genuinely invested. You need to change how investment is measured and rewarded at the leadership level. Otherwise it becomes a checkbox within 2 years. That's on page 9. He turned to page 9. Read. Turn back to page 7. Read again. She watched him hold both pages at the same time, cross-referencing them. The way engineers thought, the way people who understood systems thought. It's real, she said. Not a press release, not a photo of posterity. Real positions with real futures. He looked up from the folder. One condition, he said. Name it. The first cohort includes at least 3 people who applied to this company through the standard process and were passed over. She didn't hesitate. Already in the program design. At page 11, I saw when she watched something happen in his face that she didn't have an exact word for. Not surprise, not relief. More like her expression for a person who had been braced for disappointment for so long that the absence of it required a moment of adjustment. He picked up the pen she'd left on the desk. She had put it there deliberately, not to pressure him, just so it was available when he was ready. He signed. Not because the terms were right or the salary was favorable, both were. She could see that clearly. His decision had to do with something he was looking at that she couldn't connect from where she was sitting. Something ahead of him. Something with Imani's name on it, even though he didn't say it. He put the pen down, slid the folder back toward her. When do we start? He asked. Monday, she said.
If that works.
That works, he stood. She stood.
They looked at each other across the desk.
2 people in a room where something had just shifted. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. Just a quiet, definitive shift of the kind that you only recognize later as the moment things became different. Darnell. She said it before he reached the door. He turned. Thank you. For not giving up on people being capable of better. He held her gaze. I have a daughter who believes that's possible. Hard to argue with her. Opened the door. Him. Monday, he said, and left. She stood behind her desk, looked at the folder, looked at the city through her window, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, the view looked different. Not the city. The city was the same. Glass and steel and 7 million people living their ordinary, extraordinary lives. But something in the way she was looking at it had changed. Like a lens that had been slightly wrong for years had finally been corrected. And everything was the same and also not the same at all. 2 weeks after that, she arrived at the hangar early for routine certification check on a different aircraft. Early, as it is always. It was how she moved through the world. Ahead of things, prepared. Darnell was already there, not in his custodial uniform, in a flight suit with a safety vest, going through a pre-check with the ground crew. Moving through the checklist with the unhurried precision she had come to understand was simply how he existed. She'd arranged for him to consult on safety protocols for the certification program. His terms, his schedule. She walked over. Thought this was temporary, she said. It is. You've been here since 6. Bernard told me. He looked at her sideways. Bernard talks too much. Darnell. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the aircraft. Imani asked me last week if I was ever going to fly again.
What did Dean say?
And go fly longer, she said. But Dad, you talk about helicopters when you think I'm asleep. You use your hands when you describe how the rotors work. You don't do that about other things. He paused. 7 years old. You can't get anything past her. Celeste smiled small. Real? What did you say to that? I said she wasn't supposed to be listening as she's listening. That's not an answer. No. He looked at the helicopter, at the clean lines of it. The way the morning light caught the edge of the rotor. It's not. They stood beside each other for a moment, not talking. The ground crew had finished and gone inside. The hangar had settled into its particular morning quiet, the kind that exists before the takes its demands. She asked. I never if it. I kept them in the air so other people could. That's not what I asked. He considered the question honestly. Yes, is it? He looked at the aircraft. It's like asking someone if they miss a language they grew up from speaking. You can go years without it, but when you're near it, your whole body remembers. Celeste looked at him, at the way he stood near the aircraft, the easy familiarity of it. The flights looked right on him in a way the custodial uniform, though he wore it with complete dignity, never quite did. She reached into a jacket pocket. I kept something, she said. He looked at what she was holding, a cloth, small, stained with grease, folded carefully. He recognized it immediately, the rag he'd used to clean his hands after the repair. He'd left it on the workbench. You kept that, he said. I don't entirely know why. She looked at it in her hand, then at him. I think it reminded me that the most important they don't usually announce themselves. They just sit there, doing what they do, waiting for someone to pay attention. She paused. I look at it and I remember that I could have seen you 7 years ago, and I kept choosing not to. She let the silence hold for a moment. I don't want to make that kind of choice anymore, about anything. He looked at the cloth, then at her, and she felt, suddenly, the full absurdity and the full weight of standing here in a hangar at 7 in the morning, holding a grease-stained rag like it was something precious, trying to say something to this man that she had no clean language for. She had built a company. She had sat across from adversaries in boardrooms and not blinked. She had fired executives and restructured divisions and made decisions that kept 300 people involved and never once felt the specific vulnerability she felt right now, which was terrifying. And also she realized the point. She had spent 25 years making herself impossible to reach, building the walls so carefully, one bread at a time, that she'd eventually forgotten there was supposed to be something on the other side of them. Something other than the work and the results in the next quarter and the next contract. She almost took a step back, the old reflex. The one she'd been practicing since she was 9 years old, and her mother's plane went down off the coast of Georgia, and she had decided, in the way that 9-year-olds make decisions that shape them forever, that needing people was the most dangerous thing a person could do. She felt it, the pull of it, the familiar safety of retreating behind the professional distance. The appropriate boundaries, the correct relationship between an employer and the man who was at least partly her colleague. And she chose to deliberately and with full awareness of what she was doing, not to follow it. "Do you remember what you said to me?" she asked. "That day in the hangar, which part? The kiss part. I said I didn't need it. You didn't." She looked at him, held it. "I'm thinking about that, about what it would mean to offer something different." She took a breath. I'd like the first to be because I want to give it. Not because you've earned it. Not because it settles a debt. Not because there's an audience." She kept her eyes on his. "Just because it's what I want. If that's something you want too." He looked at her for a long moment. She had time to think.
I have miscalculated. I've completely miscalculated, and I am going to have to go back to my office and sit very still over time, and then, no, this is right. That's right. This is the first right thing I've done that has nothing to do with strategy.
His voice was quiet.
Are you sure?
"I've been sure about a lot of things in my life." She looked at him steadily. "I'm sure about this in a different way, in a way that has nothing to do with calculation." He reached out and took her hand, not her arm, not a handshake. Where you take someone's hand when you've made a decision. She looked down at them. His hands were larger, still carried the faint evidence of real work in a way that hers, smooth and careful, did not. Different hands, made by different lives. Holding on, he leaned in, slowly, completely without hurry. The way he did everything that mattered, and she rose to him, and they kissed, like a debt being settled. Not like a performance for an audience of engineers with their phones out. Not like a bet concluded or a challenge met. Just two people, in a hangar, in the early morning light, finding each other by the longest, strangest, most improbable route. Because that is how it happens sometimes. Not in places decent for it. Not at the right moment or the right circumstances. In hangars and parking lots. In the middle of things. When you have grease on your hands and your good shirt is at home and you are not prepared and the light is not flattering and it is exactly, completely, irreversibly right. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Just breathed. He said quietly, "Imani is going to be completely insufferable about this." She laughed. A real one. The kind that came from somewhere she hadn't been to in years. She's going to say she knew.
She told me on the way home from the competition, she said.
"Dad, she came all the way to Westchester in regular clothes. She likes you." Celeste pulled back just enough to look at him. "She assessed my outfit. She assesses everything. She's 7. I know it's a problem." She looked at him, at this man, specific and irreplaceable, who had been 40 feet away from her for 7 years and whom she had never bothered to actually see. "I wasted so she's just tossed." "Yeah." He looked up. "But we're not there anymore. No." She looked at their hands, still holding on. "We're not." They stood there as the morning came properly through the hangar doors. Not gold and cinematic, just ordinary morning light, gray and honest and full of the day ahead. The Owen-5 stood behind them, silent and certified and ready to fly. Somewhere in Westchester, a 7-year-old girl was getting ready for school with a Cornell scholarship certificate on her bedroom wall, and a rover on her desk, and the specific confidence of a child who has proven something to herself that no one can ever take back. And somewhere in Connecticut, an old man was sitting in his chair with a cup of coffee and a phone that now had his daughter's name on the screen, thinking about a conversation they'd had a few weeks ago, about how you start, about how you stop making the same choice twice. He was proud of her. He thought he was yet to call her tonight. On the refrigerator in the kitchen, between the drawing of the rover with the floodlight that said I'm Annie 1 and the sticky note about lunch, there was a photograph, slightly blurry. Someone's phone, bad angle. But the moment was clear. Imani on her father's shoulders, certificate above her head with both hands. His face turned up toward her, laughing. Her face turned up toward the ceiling, unguarded and triumphant. And in the very edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, in the last row, a woman in a green sweater, looking at them. Imani had put it on the refrigerator herself, that morning, before school, had found the photo on her tablet and printed it at the library and come home and put it up without saying anything about it. Darnell had noticed it at breakfast, hadn't said anything either. Next to the photograph, in Imani's handwriting, she had added a new sticky notice. This. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, all coffee in his hand, looking at the note, at the photograph, at the blur of green in the corner. Then he made breakfast, packed 2 lunches, and didn't forget.